GameDeveloper.com is a website I've talked about a few times. This is a activist website LARPing as if it's a game developer website. And in particular, these activists are specifically a part of the AAA side of things mainly. They also hold this Game Developer Conference, an annual in-person event where they love to complain about the gaming industry and complain about gamers and act like the biggest victims out there. Notoriously, they held a screaming event, guys. Yeah, I've mentioned this a few times. This is just actually insane. I will play the clip again momentarily, just like 4 seconds of it. So I think a lot of people watching this are probably familiar with this. Let me just state this one more time. Game Developer held this annual conference, the Game Developer Conference, this in-person event. And one of the panels at the event, so to speak, was this outdoor scream that they held. They had a bunch of grown adults literally screaming as loud as they could to quote-unquote protest the state of the industry. By the way, the state of the industry that they're so mad about is a bunch of these fake people getting involved in the industry, these activists who genuinely don't care about games. And a lot of them have been getting fired for various reasons that we'll go into in a moment. But let me just play this clip. You can see for yourself if you haven't seen this already. And if you've seen this already, I apologize for forcing you through this 4 seconds of just clown world again. Now, this Scream event that these extremely bizarre grown adults held was, of course, a longer event than simply 4 seconds. I just don't want to play any longer than 4 seconds of that. That's enough. And I forgot to mention, by the way, that event, the whole GDC conference, is held in San Francisco, to the surprise of nobody. And these sort of AAA activist developers are, of course, the sort of people you see making wonderful, prestigious games like Concord and Dragon Age the Veilguard. And then when those games fail, they, of course, turn around and get mad at gamers, calling us chuds and far-right Nazis and all that stuff, simply for not buying their slop and for pointing out their ridiculous DEI policies that don't actually help improve the state of the industry or make games better. As a matter of fact, historically, it looked like those policies make games worse. But, you talk about their track record and how bad it is and how their policies are not helping. And as mentioned, they'll respond by calling you a chud, a bigot, or a far-right Nazi. These are buzzwords that they love to throw out to try to smear their critics. Obviously, it doesn't go well for them, and you can see what it gets them ultimately. Their games flop, and they have to cope by going outside in San Francisco at a conference and screaming. Yes, very, very reasonable people indeed. But why are we talking about these modern audience devs, these Veilguard people, if you will? Well, they recently published their recap of 2025, what they call the 2025 State of the Game Industry. And the first section here is what they're titling the Global Game Developer Community. And they say, the developers of 2025. The game industry continues to grow and change along with its players, while the industry remains largely white and male. A few key data points show how the developer community is becoming more diverse. Gender diversity in the game industry has seen a notable shift over the past few years. Women and non-binary developers now make up 32% of game devs, compared to 29% last year and 24% in 2022. Men still make up 2/3, 66% of developers. However, that number was 75% in 2020, meaning we've seen a 9-point change over the past 5 years. LGBTQ representation among developers has also increased, with 1/4 of respondents identifying as LGBTQ+, up from 21% in 2024. Nearly half, 43%, of 18 to 24-year-old developers identify as LGBTQ+, and women developers are almost 4 times more likely than men to do so. Keep that in mind. And we'll take a brief look over at their website and their section DEI Sustainability, where they talk about building a better world through games and promoting policies such as diversity, equity, and inclusion, saying that they're dedicated to creating a safe space for the entire games ecosystem. This includes uplifting underrepresented voices in the industry, etc., etc. They even have amazing things such as pronoun tags and invisible disability stickers. It's pretty interesting that at the forefront of GameDeveloper.com and Game Developer Conference, they're not really talking about making good games and like what they can improve on for the next year and stuff like that. No, it's a bunch of virtue signaling stuff. Now, for anyone not familiar with this sort of discussion, let me easily explain why Corpos push these sort of policies. And it doesn't come from a genuine concern. No, instead it comes down to money and power. Big surprise, right? First, the money aspect. These major corporations have what's called an ESG score, and that stands for Environment, Social, and Governance. And they raised this ESG score through pushing out DEI policies. DEI, of course, standing for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. With a higher ESG score, they can then turn around and get easier access to capital through ESG-focused funding, as well as better terms on loans and debt financing through what's called ESG-linked loans provided by major institutional investors such as BlackRock and Vanguard. And then there's the power angle. This one's even more clear-cut because these corpos attempt to use the industry, the gaming industry, to shoehorn in their own political rhetoric and ultimately to try to shoehorn this rhetoric into video games as well. For example, once again, Veilguard or Concord. Why do you think Concord put pronouns in the character selection screen? We've never really seen a hero shooter do that, right? I don't even think Overwatch, which Activision Blizzard is also very far in the DI stuff and ESG stuff, but I don't even think they took it that far. I don't think Overwatch has pronouns on the character selection menu. But Concord was like, hold up, hold my beer. I'll even outdo Overwatch and even outdo ActiBliz. Let's make this like DI slop game, and we'll even put pronouns on the character selection screen because they really wanted to raise that ESG score, and they also foolishly overestimated the modern audience, thinking that the so-called mythical modern audience would really buy and support their game. And yeah, how'd that work out for them? What'd they get? 697 concurrent players, I think it was, at their peak. Great job. But yeah, it's crazy that you can talk about these facts. What I just said is pure facts about what's going on in the gaming industry. And they'll turn around and call me a chud and a far-right Nazi for pointing out their own policies. And they'll deny this stuff is happening. And it's like, dude, you literally published this information. How are you going to deny this when I'm literally reading what you guys have verifiably published on your own website? Like, I didn't make this stuff up. I'm reading what they put out there. But, you know, they want to appeal to the investors. They want to appeal to these funds. And when gamers talk about this stuff, oh, here comes the hit piece. Here comes the smears. Here's something else interesting. Get this. GDC's parent company is a British corporation called Informa. And Informa also very heavily pushes DEI policies. So it's pretty interesting that we have a publicly traded British company, which, by the way, I think they have a market cap of around $15 billion when converted to USD. And through GDC that they own, they're actively making American games and Western games overall worse. And so keeping all that information in mind, all of that context about GDC and its parent company Informa and how various corporations push these sort of DEI policies to get ESG funding, et cetera, all that stuff, right? It paints a very clear picture going back to GDC's 2025 State of the Industry and how they published this document talking about how there's now less white people and less men in the gaming industry. Again, with a focus on AAA. And they present this information as a good thing. They're basically saying, like, thumbs up, guys, there's less of them now. Back in 2024, it was also being reported that a GDC advisor named Marina Diaz went completely mask off about her hate for both white people and men. Apparently, deleting these tweets after people began to talk about them, saying things such as, I went from thinking I'm a terrible designer to consult and train teams at one of the biggest game companies in the world. Keep believing in yourself and F white men and gatekeepers. So on top of her being a completely mask-off bigot in that tweet, it's also a hilarious self-report. She basically inadvertently admits that she's a DEI hire at a corporation. Great job. In a different, allegedly deleted tweet from her, she talks about doing violent things to white men. Just a very weird and trashy individual, but completely par the course for the sort of person you would expect to be a GDC advisor. This takes us to Section 2 of GDC's 2025 State of the Game Industry, where they talk about industry layoffs. And they say, layoffs have become part of the industry with announcements now a weekly, if not daily occurrence. About 11% of respondents reported being laid off in the past 12 months. Altogether, 41% of game developers have been impacted by layoffs this year, up from 35% in our 2024 report. Now again, GDC predominantly reports on the AAA part of the industry. That's what this stuff is really referring to. And that's where these layoffs are really occurring. And so when many AAA corporations hire so many of the worst people and engage in so many anti-consumer practices, it's no surprise that gamers will see news like this and view it as a good thing. And it does suck for the minority of actual good, genuine devs out there who get pulled into this mess. And to those devs, I of course wish all the best. But the industry has become so highly corrupt that this continued correction is once again a good thing. And I say continued because these layoffs have really been increasing year over year since around 2022. Because throughout 2020 and 2021, there was the so-called COVID boom, where AAA saw massive revenue spikes from people being inside during lockdown, and the general consumer spending increase, which was going up, I think, around 27% and 20% year over year, respectively. And so many AAA corporations like EA, Ubisoft, Sony, Microsoft, etc., began to rapidly hire, and investors were dumping money into these corporations, including ESG capital firms, which resulted in a further proliferation of DEI policies in AAA and the influx of DEI consultation firms like the notorious SBI. They all saw it as very easy money. And it turns out that these corporations overhired and overspent. Many budgets and salaries became massively inflated. And by 2022, the COVID boom started to slow down. And by 2023, revenue had dipped significantly. So there was suddenly this desperation in AAA and the start of these layoffs in AAA that GDC has been lamenting for years now. And these major AAA corporations also had the bright idea at that point to double down on DEI in a desperate attempt that ESG funding could offset their declining revenue and sustain their bloat from overhiring during the COVID boom. This, of course, resulted in games like SSK The Jail from Rocksteady and Warner Brothers, Dragon Age Veilguard and Concord, and we even saw some smaller dev studios try this failing strategy. For example, Tales of Kenzera Zao by Surgeon Studios, with backing from EA under their EA Originals publishing label. Surgeon Studios also got exposed for having ties to the DI consultation firm SBI, and the main dev even having ties to SBI's co-founder Kim Belair under a sweet baby alias that goes by a French name I'm not even going to try to pronounce because I'm sure I'll mess it up and butcher it. But this is all to say, once again, GDC just came out with this document lamenting how, oh no, the layoffs are still getting even worse, guys. This year, there's now 41% of game devs in AAA being impacted by layoffs, up from 35% in 2024, 6% more. And for genuine gamers out there, this is a sign that, hey, things might be getting better. Here's the big thing, though, too. While it would, of course, be nice to see things getting better in the AAA industry and some of these disingenuous hacks that have been getting involved in it being gutted from the industry, being laid off and all that, ultimately, we're not desperate for AAA games. This is a huge mistake that AAA keeps thinking. They keep thinking like, oh yes, we'll just make the newest release, charge a bunch of money for it, it'll come out unoptimized and whatever else, and gamers are just going to buy it. Even beloved franchises that, people used to be very excited to buy the newest release of, well, this is to say that this is happening less and less. People are kind of just moving on from AAA. And there was even a study last year that the majority of US gamers apparently don't even buy more than 2 new games a year. And of those 2, they could very well both or at least one be indie games, right? No one's even saying those 2 are AAA games. Now, I think that claim was about 60% of gamers, if I recall, saying that 60% or so were only buying 2 new games a year. And then around 30% were actually only buying 1 game a year. Of course, some people will buy more than that, especially during sales like Steam Summer Sales and whatnot. So make of all that what you will. But all that aside too, it definitely seems like a fact that, yeah, a lot of people are not buying games as much as they used to, and they're certainly not buying AAA games as much as they used to. And ultimately, even if AAA is having this correction, it's going to have to be, let me rephrase. They have a lot of work to do to earn goodwill back. And simply gutting the DEI stuff and all that is only one step. There's also all the predatory monetization strategies, like I just said as well, like unoptimized games, overpriced stuff, etc. This desperate push into live service, and then they do a terrible job of that. There's a lot of issues. Don't get me wrong. I have greatly criticized all the ESG and DEI stuff in this video, and for good reason. It deserves all that criticism. But I'm never going to sit here acting like that's the only problem. There is a lot of issues with AAA. But yeah, we'll see where things keep going from here. I think that's all I wanted to talk about in this video. TLDR, GDC's mad that layoffs are occurring. Gamers are happy. There you go. The TLDR is supposed to be at the beginning of the video, isn't it? Well, I guess it's too late for that. But hey, if you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a lovely week ahead, and I'll see you in the next one.